You can now get a 30-day trial to experience The Athletic for free. Visit the link in the description below to try it now.
Hello and welcome to Norwich ARE F. This production was filmed before Norwich beat Everton. With Michael Bailey, The Athletic's Norwich reporter, and here today we're going to talk all about Norwich and how they're or are they? Who could say? Here's some things we're going to cover today. Norwich ARE F. That's the first point. The second point, we're going to find out about the model of the club, how is Norwich run, talk about player recruitment, because although Norwich is sort of known externally as a team with good player recruitment, it might not be so true anymore. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Daniel Farke left, of course, recently, but Stuart Webber is still there, so we're going to find out a little bit about that. We're going to find out about the change of ambition or direction since Daniel Farke left. And of course, will this cycle repeat if Norwich aren't to go down this season? Will they come back up next year and then go down again? Norwich are okay. Where shall we begin? Because there's so much to talk about here. Michael Bailey, hello, welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
First question, I think I've already asked it. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's nice to hear it put so brutally in front of me, because sometimes I get a bit stuck in a bubble.
Yeah.
It's very difficult at the moment for Norwich this season, and I think they're probably borderline existential crisis territory, depending on what happens now and where it goes. Yeah. So it's a curious time for everyone associated with Norwich City Football Club.
Sure. Well, we're halfway through the 21-22 season. Norwich have scored 8 goals at the time of recording. We just had a quick look at the table from 2 years ago when Norwich were relegated bottom, 26 goals at the end of the year. So in terms of the attacking output with the team right now, it's not helping at all, and you're still conceding a lot.
Yep, that is the biggest thing. It's worse, really, in terms of goal scoring. I mean, it struck me that they scored fewer goals than they lost games 2 years ago. But everything had the caveat of Project Restart. And it was all right because there were no fans in at the end. And it was just weird. And this is like real football, and it's even worse. And it's very difficult. They kind of lost a good chunk of their identity under Daniel Farke. And now Dean Smith's taken charge. And it's still not really clear what that identity is going forwards, obviously with all the issues of losing players and what have you to injury and whatever. But the reality is on the pitch, they've lost their way, and even when they have created chances, they've not been able to take them. Hence 8 goals, 4 from open play. Yeah. To this point of the season is frightening.
I think I've identified the problem.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm going to show you.
Okay, please do. JJ's walking over to the tactics board there.
It's because the team sucks.
Right.
So
coming back down now?
No, I was going to show you. If you're looking at a Premier League team, right? So they come up from the Championship and we're half decent. Players that, I mean, feel free to disagree with me a lot with this, right? But the players you want to keep, that would maybe keep a team in the Premier League. Timo Pukki, obviously, scores almost all of their goals.
Sure. Yes, indeed.
Max Aaron's really high potential wonder kid, linked with a lot of big clubs, but the talk of that seems to have gone down a little bit of late. Grant Hanley's there, not going to highlight him. Billy Gilmore on loan. Is he as good as he's meant to be for Norwich?
I mean, we could do a whole video on this alone,
right.
But let's not.
I love Gilmore, but I can see why. I know that fans aren't.
That's because you're Scottish, JJ.
Correct. Kenny McLean. I think he's a very good player and is definitely mid-table, lower-table Premier League quality. So again, another solid player. We've had trouble with left-back. Was it Giannoulis normally plays? Giannoulis?
He was brought to play there, yes.
Brandon Williams on loan from Man United's all right. Krul's probably a Premier League player. This is not enough. I mean, the problem is, the secret about football is that if you have better players, you tend to win games. And every single team in the league has better players than Norwich.
Sure. Okay, well, that's a really good starting point. Thanks for that, JJ. Let me ask you this, Michael. Norwich are sort of known as a bit of a holistic club, right? They're not everybody's second favourite, but apart from Ipswich fans, nobody hates Norwich, They have a model. What is that model? How does it work?
I think the idea of the model is that they recruit smartly and cheaply so that there is going to be future value in those players and that they can develop them with their coaching and with performances on the pitch. So that might be younger players through the academy or ones that they've recruited and they've spotted value in. That's definitely the idea. The club are trying to create revenue from that recruitment. They are also trying to create revenue from success, which leads to promotion, which again is the stick that they often get beaten with. And that's probably primarily what they're trying to do. I think there is this goal of trying to establish themselves as a Premier League club, quite clearly. I think there's a massive question mark over whether you can do that when you're self-funding, when you've got no investment coming in from anywhere else in the club. I think that's very difficult. And I don't know what the answer to that is if they don't then go up for a prolonged period of time. So I think that's what they're trying to do as a model. They have to take risks. So you have to then probably forgive them for not everything working out because of the parameters they're trying to work in. But it does put the pressure on them getting a chunk of it right.
Yeah, okay. Well, I want to sort of draw a theme here, which I think we're probably going to return to throughout the course of this video. 3 or 4 seasons ago, you would say, looking at Norwich's future prospects, that they were promising. And I think, we talked about the model there. We took Daniel Farke in place. People were excited about that. Stuart Webber, of course, still there. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you about him and what his job is. And you've mentioned recruitment already. Some of the players they brought in 3 seasons ago, again, made the team look really promising. That cycle hasn't really borne out the way I think that fans, or at least people at the club, were expecting it to. Stuart Webber is a key part of that. What is his role there? What does he do?
I think he does everything. I think he came in it was his first sporting director job. He'd been at Wolves before, and it had sort of come up through scouting and academy scouting and recruitment. Then at Huddersfield, admittedly working under Dean Hoyle, who's the owner there and really hands-on owner. But Stuart Webber was basically in charge of the operations and the football side of developing what Huddersfield were doing. He brought in David Wagner and everyone, including myself. Remember when that appointment happened, you're like, well, that's a bit weird.
Didn't he nearly bring in Dean Smith at that time as well?
He certainly had a chat with him, yes. So I don't think, clearly Dean Smith didn't hold that against him. Huddersfield Town became this hipster club, and ultimately, from almost nowhere.
Huddersfield notoriously cool.
Compared to Norwich for some. Got them promoted effectively by what he built and by what David Wagner was able to create from it. Stuart Webber left before they got promoted for Norwich, which was a chance for him to really get to grips, probably in an even more hands role himself. And he pretty much leads everything, I would say. His wife, who's Zoe Ward, she currently now it's just Stuart Webber and Zoe Ward as the day-to-day running of the club. Everyone's reporting into them, effectively, right. Yes. That's since Ben Kensel left in the summer, I think it was, as Chief Operating Officer. He's now Chief Exec at Hibs, which is quite interesting what's going on there. So there you go.
I knew that.
But essentially, everything that the club are trying to do, the direction, the development of the training ground, the academy work, the first team recruitment, it's pretty much all going through Stuart Webber.
Yeah, and they've invested money in the academy and the training facilities as well, haven't they, recently?
Hugely, yeah. And that is, if we suddenly brought Stuart Webber in here, he'd sit down and go, look at the training ground, look at what we've done. We've completely, it looks like a proper training ground. No criticism there at all. And given they've got no money coming in, the fact they've done that is remarkable in itself.
Is it fair to say on the model that they can't really afford to take the risk of buying? So when you're buying players, we'll come to recruitment in a second, but when the players they're targeting, they can't spend an overly huge amount on them because it's kind of risk management and they're so likely to go down again, they don't want to spend that sort of money? Or is it, because you get parachute payments when you go down, right? So you can sustain, you get money in. So that's their main income is going to be from, I guess, your placement in the table, whether it's Championship or Premier League. So if you want to put money into the youth system to try and future-proof yourself, that's one way to then hopefully bring players through to sell on to make your money.
Yes.
But because then it looks very much to the outsider like myself, that it's almost like a business, which I suppose most football clubs are, that they run it up. It doesn't really matter if they stay up or not because they're going to still have enough money to survive and pay all the staff and then go up again and down and down.
Yeah, essentially they can only spend what they know they're going to be able to afford the following season.
It feels like a rude word to put it in those terms, though, doesn't it? But it does look like that.
It does. And I suppose a lot of people maybe disregard the fact that every other team probably has that additional investment in from the ownership or, as well as the television money.
Yeah.
Norwich commit a lot to bonuses and transfer fees if they're successful. Yeah. So Amy Buendia cost £1.5 million when they signed him, and it was £6 million after promotion. Yeah. So that's one case. But if you're adding several, and then the bonuses, and then the wage increase, and you're a club that's only getting £60 million in your first instalment when you go up, and you've suddenly got to spend 50 million quid and you've got no other money coming in from elsewhere. But also, Norwich have to say to players when they're coming in, we've got to give you a Championship salary if we get relegated. And a player who goes elsewhere a club that has got more flexibility can go, no, don't worry about that. We'll either pay it or we'll just sell you on, don't worry about it. So there's those kind of issues they're having to deal with. They've got to be creative with how they do that. And that can sometimes be a hit and miss in terms of when you get a player in. But what Norwich's decisions are also questionable, I think. Should they have brought in so many players this summer for that amount of money? Should they have brought in fewer but for a bigger budget per player, so you end up getting a better quality player in? Because I look at the squad at the moment and see a lot of a muchness, really. You can change the personnel, but it's not necessarily going to change the quality.
Sure. Let's do recruitment from this season now, because you've brought it up so fantastically there. It was quite a lot of money spent, Michael. Unlike 2 seasons ago when Norwich were promoted to the Premier League and didn't spend anything and went down, this time they've been promoted to the Premier League, spent quite a lot of money, and maybe we'll go down. I mean, players who seem like a hit. Rashica, straight away. I mean, he's a good player, obviously, when he is able to stay fit and get into the team. But looking through the rest of the list here, and it's a fairly long list, we have some loan deals. Ozan Kabak, of course. There's Matthias Norman, who's been a good player for the team so far. Billy Gilmore hasn't really featured. Brandon Williams, who's featured in a limited way. Other actual signings, Josh Sargent, for example, who I think it's fair to say there's a split of opinion on him. It's
Maybe.
not been like overall...
It's not a 50-50 split.
No, sure. Overall, it's not been so far a successful window. Although perhaps, sometimes we look at Transfermarkt and we see teams do sign 10, 11 players a summer and 1 or 2 of them work out those are the ones you remember.
fits the model, because like Christian Christos, I should say, Greek, like a wonder kid, really highly rated, and Football Manager has him listed as a high potential player, and I trust their scouting a lot. But Solis is signed as a young player. He's 19 when they signed him, or 19 now, maybe both. And so the idea is that you sign them young because they can't attract players who are in their peak. They have to sign players who might get to a peak that would keep them in a certain level, but they can't find the players who would eventually play for Real Madrid. They can get ones who might be able to sign for a team like Everton, but they have to get them below that. So Solis is in that sort of category where he might turn out to be a great player like Buendia and they can sell him for loads more, but it takes time for a player like him to adapt to the Premier League, and no one else is looking at him just now. So that's what they go for, but he's not going to be ready right yet. It could be a 2-3 years.
Yeah, and I don't think that was the plan. It's kind of contradictory in a way, because I think they wanted him to be involved this year, but there was no guarantee that he was going to get up to speed.
Yeah.
He looked really promising in his first few appearances. He then took a penalty that he wasn't supposed to take against Liverpool in the Cup, and from that point on, Daniel Farke didn't really want to play him, and he hasn't looked the same player since he's come on. So again, you're then dealing with events during the season that maybe affect his confidence or his development, and it's not quite as straightforward as Football Manager. Oh, this player's good, and oh look, he's now progressing in this way.
It's Do you hear this? Do you hear what he's saying?
No, it all blurred out when he was talking. So.
That's generally the effect I have. So I think it's. Again, Norwich have made that decision that Christos Solis is a really high-quality young player with not much football experience, because he had only just burst into the scene, but someone that they wanted to take the risk on. But maybe they have found out that can't work for them at this stage. It feels like a signing they should have made after they'd survived to then develop the squad, rather than pinning it on him helping them to survive their first season. We do have this question mark as to what these players and their expectations are should Norwich get relegated. They'll all know that it's going to happen, but they've left the chance of playing in Europe to come to Norwich and to play in the Premier League, and it could be Rotherham away next year.
Well, to take recruitment back to 2018-19, this is really interesting to me, right? That summer transfer window, Buendia was brought in, so was Pukki, so was Tim Krul. And of course, Kenny McLean was brought in that window.
It was January before.
At the January before. That was the summer that they sold James Maddison, who was a huge prospect, very exciting player, and everyone at Norwich was very excited about. 3 years later, those sort of 3 transfers that we've just talked about there, they're still the best ones that have happened, right? And I think for me, I'm very fond of Norwich, as some people watching will know. A lot of my family members are Norwich fans, and I keep an eye out, and I'm very fond of them. But I still have an external view. And I sort of think of Norwich as this very smart recruiting club, as you said at the beginning. But when I look at the transfers they've made since those 3, I question whether that reputation that I have of them, the perception I have of them, is based almost entirely on those 3 players and not signings that they've made since. Is that unreasonable of me to say, or?
No, I think there's a saying, isn't there? Like if you get up for the first day early, then you can sleep in till noon. Is that the saying?
That's a great
Essentially,
saying. Yeah.
it probably is much more eloquent if you Google it. And essentially, they made those good pieces of recruitment. And so what happens after there, it's all right because Norwich recruited Emi Buendia. People are still being interviewed and talking about it, and it's gone. They've sold him. He's already. I mean, you say they spent a lot of money this window. They still made 33 million quid on selling Emi. And I suppose what they were trying to do this summer was what they did 3 years ago with selling James Maddison, but improving the squad in the areas they really needed to without losing the bits that they lost from an outstanding standout player as James was. And it's, I don't know why. I mean, some of the personnel making the recruitment decisions behind and underneath Stuart Webber are different. They were different this summer. Head of recruitment Kieran Scott left sort of during the window, which, externally Norwich got their business done, but I don't know how settling that made the whole process. I don't know then who's influencing things in terms of agents and who's making the final decisions. How much of a say did Daniel Farke have? Maybe more than before. And I guess they've tried to bring in younger players with more sell-on value, but they spent more money on those players, and I fear they're running the risk of not getting that money back because in the Premier League they are not good enough yet.
Along the same lines as recruitment, one thing we can say that Norwich are successful at is youth products, right? I mean, like at the moment, Todd Cantwell and Max Aaron's players that have already been mentioned by JJ, who probably won't be at Norwich in 2 or 3 years' time, maybe it's fair to say, but certainly will bring in hefty enough transfer fees for a club of that stature. Players like Ben Godfrey, who've already moved on before, Murphy as well. Is that still going to happen? Is there a pipeline of players coming through?
Yeah, 2 Murphys. I think so. But again, this is I suppose with recruitment, you have to wait like 12 to 18 months before you can fairly judge it. How long do you wait for an academy to fairly judge it? So Norwich have put a lot of money into recruiting academy prospects. Some of those from 2 to 3 years ago are just getting to the sort of 23s period, but they're not kicking into the first team. So are they then failures? I mean, I would have expected 1 or 2 of them maybe to come through more. Every player that's come through from the academy so far, they've been given, I mean, Daniel Farke did a brilliant job of giving them opportunities, of trusting them and developing them as players. So that helped as a finishing school, really, for the talent that was already at the club. But we can't really judge the recruitment that's happened since.
No, sure.
And then how that kicks on. Andrew Omobamidele, centre-back, looks incredibly talented. I think they're really hopeful on him. Players like John Rowe, who made his debut at Palace recently, just at the end of last year. He's got a new contract. There's a few players in the 23s teams that they're hoping will break through. And Norwich are reliant on their academy. I mean, they do spend a lot of money on it when they don't have that much money, theoretically. So
Big catchment area.
Big catchment area, I mean, half of which is the North Sea.
Sure. But some of the best players have come from the sea, haven't they? I always remember from the sea. I always remember this story about Iceland, before the 2016 Euros, about how 15 years before that, they decided to build indoor football training facilities in the country so that players could play, because prior to that, half the year, the footballers couldn't play football because it was snowing and ice land everywhere. And then 15 years later, you have an incredible team which goes that far as it did in 2016. So maybe we're talking about a decade, when you make these sorts of investments in academies, maybe it really is 10 years down the line we make that decision.
I mean, Norwich have already got an indoor pitch, so that's great news.
That's a real step up on Iceland, next up is, of course, Daniel Farke was fired, which was an interesting one again for people who, I think the big theme from this conversation is a real divide between Norwich fans and non-Norwich fans, right? Everyone outside Norwich, I think, thinks, Daniel Farke's a good coach, isn't he? That's a nice club, things are going well there. Norwich fans, different perspective. Of course, Norwich fans. But Daniel Farke being sacked was a difficult situation to manage. It was inevitable, though, right, based on the results of this season?
I think it became it, yeah. And it's for that, I look at it now and think, well, he probably waited a bit too long. But then you'd have never have done it after he got promoted, even though they were looking at it, I think, inside the club and thinking, has much changed to make sure this Premier League season is different to 2 years ago? Potentially not, but you still can't make that decision early on. I think the Watford game, 5 games in, was a real opportunity, and they just weren't at it, and that was the point where I felt you're proving that this is going to be the same again. So that was when red flags went up for me, but no one's going to sack him unless you're Watford off the back of a result like that.
And it's nice football as well, right? So like he wants to play the same way that got them promoted, and they kind of dominated the championship. Do you want to do the tactics?
Let's do the tactics one. This is exciting.
Yeah. You can play with it. So it is like a 4-3-3. That's pretty much what Dean Smith has done as well now, right? Same sort of thing.
I think that was the plan initially.
Now, like when Farke was playing, so I think the fullbacks get high and wide, right? They push up. Do they play through lines? What do they do?
Very much. So you've got a nominal 5 sort of defensively, but you both. I mean, Sargent's not really a winger, but that was where he kind of looked more promising, and a lot of physicality to get the ball up and down. Theoretically, I don't know how much of a goal threat there was, and you've got players here in Kenny. I mean, Billy loves to play short passes and link everything all over the pitch. So the idea is you're squeezing everything in, and then defensive midfield. This would have been Ollie Skip in the Championship last year, really covering the back so that your centre backs can come up and everything's moved up really nicely.
He's a huge miss in the Championship team, right? Because that position here, the 6, is so important when you're playing this sort of possession football. Yeah. It links everything from defence. You can't play through lines. And then if you've got a player like Pukki who can't really hold the ball up, you can't get the ball quickly from back to front. You've got to play through lines to get it up the pitch.
Yes, and they struggled in transition a lot in their first season because they didn't really have a natural holding midfielder of the right quality. Matthias Norman's been hit and miss in terms of his fitness, and he's out. We're waiting for him to come back. So that's a tricky bit. If he's fit, he scored in Norwich's win at Brentford. Everything looked much more secure. Mm-hmm. But that's probably one of the issues between this and the Championship is that Norwich lost their 2 best players and still had to try and improve the team. I think that's hard to ignore, but they would have known that because Ollie Skip was a Tottenham player.
Sure. He wasn't yours.
He was never ours. And it was very different how Norwich played. So Norwich played more of a 3-5-2. So if we put Kenny as last season they were doing this, and
he's best there, like driving into the box from late runs.
Yeah, well, never does it for Norwich. We rarely see it for Norwich. But if we'll have to pretend that's Kenny and Norman's Ollie, and let's give Billy some creative license. Okay. They made a thing of having both centre backs, both central midfielders coming wide to collect the ball, so that the whole pitch was ahead of him, and they weren't able to get turned around easily. So, and if the ball was here, you'd Skip, and then if it was the other side, McLean would be able to come in here, and it would just allow the fullbacks to really push on and really, have everything ahead of everyone without looking open at the back. But it felt like Daniel Farke felt that wasn't going to work. So there was a complete change of shape. They tried to sign players who would help offer a better balance, but he never really made it work. And having not picked up a single point for 8 games, we got to a point where we were, say, going to Burnley, playing a back 5, a midfield 3, for example, and then this, sort of hoping that they get a goal. And that was the only way Norwich were really trying to pick up some points to give them a foothold, but they never got to the point where they were playing more players up front to offer an attacking threat.
What are the significant changes now under Dean Smith? Because obviously we talked about the sort of model and the system before. One of my questions would be, now that Daniel Farke has gone, is the footballing identity on the pitch linked to that model, or are Norwich happy to experiment with different types of football under Dean Smith to see what will give them the best results?
It's been difficult at times to judge it, because the start offered a real change in terms of I thought Norwich were getting the ball up quicker. Yeah. They looked a bit more aggressive at this half, up the top end of the pitch. So they were trying to, there was a bit more energy and proactivity about it. Whilst actually, they were working harder. So I think they were more aware that they were going to have to do both sides of the pitch of the game, rather than relying on their quality to create things, which by the body of evidence wasn't really working in itself. Then they lose a load of players, and it all becomes a real piggledy mess.
It's hard to see what anyone's doing when there are COVID absences and matches are being missed and all the rest of it.
But I think ultimately there's a 4-3-3 that he would rather play. I think if Norman's there, then there's a bit of security. The fullbacks, it's probably, that's exciting, one going forward and the other keeping tight rather than both pushing up.
It seems a bit more defensively solid to me, like a bit more like almost like the club, a bit more risk aware rather than just trying to push forward. Like the way when the guys pull out wide and you're trying to build through that way, there's so much space in the middle. And I guess you're trying to play everything wide. It relies on you putting the ball in the box for strikers, and you don't really have them.
Well, Tammy Pukki works off low crosses and cutbacks, so then you're relying on a fullback being down here to cut the ball back and have other people in the box. But Norwich have never, in 4 or 5 years, had an option where your fullback gets to here and slings it in the box because he's never going to win a header. Kenny McLean might, but you've then got to balance it with how your midfield looks because these guys are probably here. And this is probably how Norwich have looked a lot when they're attacking in the Premier League. The Premier League clubs are so bright, they know that, oh, you know what, I'm just going to stick a couple of players here. And, we immediately got a 2v3 and they're probably good enough to take advantage of it. So it's been a major
Sounds like
issue.
you could do with a Marouane Fellaini, a sort of plan B. I wonder if he's available.
We could just dye Josh Sargent's hair.
Yeah, that would work too. Another question, Michael, is the cycle repeating. Now, we've kind of talked about this already, of course, as a theme throughout today's conversation. There are examples of other teams that have been promoted at the same times as Norwich have. Leeds and Brentford teams that have stuck to their own footballing principles, haven't sort of followed the cliche of going more defensive when you're promoted. And it's worked out for them. So I think that slightly older argument doesn't really apply to Norwich anymore. Do you see any signs with Dean Smith as part of his early tenure that he can change things? Even if Norwich are relegated this season, is there hope for the future?
I mean, right now, if you offer me another championship title, top 2 finish next season, I would take it. Which I appreciate means we're already saying they're relegated.
That's quite fun though, right?
Yeah, it's amazing fun. In fact, I'm a little bit worried that it's been really good these few years. And if you told Norwich fans right now, you know what, it's been really good these last few years, they'd be going, yeah, whatever, look at it, it's rubbish in the Premier League. So it can be sometimes careful what you wish for. I
know for sure Uncle Damien enjoys going to championship grounds and winning games of football every other year. It's more fun.
It is, because you're winning. Yeah. I watched Norwich for 10 years in the championship when they weren't winning most of their games. It was less fun.
No fun.
I mean, it was probably still more fun than the last 2 Premier League seasons, but it was less fun than winning it. And again, existential crisis territory. What happens if Norwich don't just bounce back? You can't just assume they'll bounce back. It's the championship. It's horrible.
Well, have you seen that film with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt? The one in America, I think it was called Live, Die, Repeat. But here it was called something else, different movie title.
I don't know what the movie is.
It's basically Groundhog Day, but in a sci-fi world where Tom Cruise dies a lot in it and then comes back to life, and then it starts again. I'm just wondering...
Amazing.
I don't know why I've done that. But could Dean Smith be Norwich's Tom Cruise?
I mean, he's quite a handsome man. I think he could probably a bit taller.
Charismatic.
Tom Cruise could never play centre back, I would guess. I mean, it does strike me that he's there and he has that ability to coach successfly in the Championship to a degree. I mean, it took a bit to get Brentford sort of close, and he didn't get them over the line. And actually, when they do, if Norwich get relegated, don't laugh. That's not going.
There's an option for it to not happen.
It isn't mathematically impossible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone will expect Dean Smith to just get Norwich promoted at a canter. He's got huge shoes to fill at that level. As easy as the job was to come in at Premier League level. So he would have a lot to prove, as with the recruitment again. Sure. And I just think the whole journey of Norwich in these past 3-4 years has been, at every point, well, we will work towards sustaining ourselves in the Premier League. Even though they got relegated, it doesn't matter because they were still recruiting for the Premier League to come back and then stay up.
Yeah.
No one's really explained what the story is or the goal is when you then get relegated for a second time.
Yeah.
Do Norwich fans even want to get promoted
well,
for a
there's an
third time?
interesting perspective there, though, isn't there? Because you would say other promoted teams who might languish around the relegation zone and just miss out on relegation every year, their aim is still to become more stable in the future and stabilise themselves within that kind of 10 to 14 range. Just because Norwich are going up and down, does that really matter? Is that really any different apart from the obvious financial toll that would take?
This is Stuart Webber's infinite game, isn't it? That it doesn't matter actually which level you're at because football never ends. Sure. It's like playing Football Manager. It never ends. You just keep playing, and that, I guess. But no one's saying that this season because it really hurts and everyone feels rubbish. So it's difficult how you reconcile the feeling of rubbish with it never ending.
Sure. Well, videos end though, JJ. So do you have any closing remarks? I want Norwich to stay up.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think
We all do.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they stayed up.
Everyone does.
I don't know. I think it's way more fun to watch your team win stuff, right? I'd rather if I were a Norwich fan and the team I support is Aberdeen and they've been terrible most of my life. So if you're, it's rubbish when you're just trying to not get relegated all the time. There's no point. You spend all your money going to the game. You know you're going to get pumped. You do, or you get a random 1-0 win over Man United or something like that, and that's like your trophy win for the year. And then you get back down, then you get to actually win games. So you go into a game knowing you can actually win it. To me, that's infinitely more fun than just than coming up. And I mean, teams can do it, and it's to do with recruitment. That's really important. And Smith's a good manager, but Farke is a good manager. Like Wagner was a good manager. Wagner? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, again, my manager's mixed up. But it doesn't matter if the recruitment isn't aligned with what you can afford and the people you get in. I mean, a lot of it's going to be luck. Some teams get lucky with youth products coming through the exact time that they're ready to play. If you manage to keep players like Maddison, Cantwell, Godfrey together in the same team, that's solid. It reminds me of like West Ham back in the day when you had Cole and Ferdinand and all those kind of guys. If you can keep those together, then you can build a team around it. But you can't pay them enough to keep them. You can't offer them the chances and opportunities you get when you're at a higher club. And they're coming through at different times. It's not one golden generation, it's just different age groups. There's a big difference between under 17 and under 19. There's 2 years of development before they tend to be ready. So you can't keep someone waiting around. You just sell this guy, get some money, maybe buy someone in to replace him. So my closing comments is I don't know.
That's JJ's view, and I think that would be the view of non-Norwich fans for sure. But as our closer for the video, Michael, do you think that view is shared by Norwich supporters?
I think they want to see the players come through. And I think actually it's quite hard for Norwich fans to accept that they won't get to see the best of players. I think at the moment, in the last few years, players have kind of moved on to probably the right club for huge amounts of money when Norwich have had their own success. I think it will become difficult if they're in the Championship. Andrew Omobamidele has to go for £8 million to Nottingham Forest, who are in the top two. Yeah. That is a difficult dynamic. And I think under Norwich's model, that becomes very hard to sustain and to keep people enthused because you're always getting picked off and they'd want more than that.
But they do grow their own vegetables.
At Colney, they do grow their own vegetables. Sustainable football model.
Cucumbers.
Cucumbers.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is where the Ralph Rangnick to Manchester United story broke, where a team of journalists have provided unrivaled coverage of Newcastle United's new ownership and where dedicated writers cover every Premier League team no matter their place in the table. And you can try it free now for 30 days.